Well, welcome to this episode of Rain Check. I'm Chief Meteorologist David Young, joined by meteorologist Cole Engle. Cole, interesting times in the weather world as always. I mean, this has been one crazy winter, and now we're getting into late winter, getting closer to spring.
Yeah, lots of up and downs, especially downs. Those temperatures that we've had a couple weeks ago, they were in the negatives, and it seems like they just never ended. We've kind of leveled things out a little bit now. It's been in the 30s, kind of where we, should be this time of year, but
Right.
still bitterly cold.
Yeah, and I mean, it's for us in the weather world. I mean, we're heading into late February, getting into March now,
Yep.
and so it's a good time, for us to kind of look back and look at how we did this winter and how we expect to do as we head into this spring. But the numbers, they don't lie. It was cold, and we're looking at December, January, and into February.
Yeah, if you can remember back in December, I think it was the first 2 weeks, it was much colder than average. I think our biggest snow of the season wasn't actually back in November. I think it was the 29th and the 30th. But then we had quite a cold stretch of weather for the first 2 weeks of December, which really just brought our average down. We got back, I think Christmas, we got into close to the 50s at least.
Right.
So I think that helped bring the numbers up a little bit, but still it was overall almost about 4 degrees below average from where we should have been.
It's hard. I mean, you look at those January numbers, 4.4 degrees below average. I mean, that's cold, but had we not had the record warmth we had at the beginning of January, that would have really been a record-setting year.
Yeah, it would be really interesting to see if we didn't have that 60-degree day that we had. I think it was on January 9th. See how much that skewed the overall number, because like I said, the last 2 weeks of January, it was just constant negatives, especially for our lows. So certainly very cold temperatures that we had at the end of the month.
And then in February, we ended up 2.1 above average, or thereabouts.
Yeah.
And it was an interesting month because we had some really cold weather, and then we had some nice warm ups as well.
Beautiful weather. Yeah, we got into the 60s, or it was a very gradual warm up. We got into the 50s. We had plenty of sunshine, and then we had a day where we actually were in the 60s. It actually came with a little bit of severe weather too, but certainly a very interesting winter so far, but it's safe to say that we're not quite done with it yet.
Yeah, and I mean, when you look back at this winter, snowfall is going to be probably pretty close to average for us, maybe way above in the UP, places like that, but not too far from normal for us. But when you look at those days, boy, the cold weather.
Yeah, 23 days is where we were at or below freezing, spanning from January 18th all the way to February 9th. I mean, 3 weeks. It just felt like it never ended. But it definitely wasn't the worst cold stretch of weather that we had, because you can see all the way back in 1978, they were sitting just under 2 months of where days were either at or below freezing, consecutive.
And of course, you think 78. Of course, that was one of the year of the big blizzards.
The big one, as
yeah.
they say. Yes, yeah, no. So just added that to it, and I was looking at the snowfall records back from 1978, and we got all that snow from that big blizzard, and it just sat there for weeks because we never had a warm up. So definitely, if you liked snow, that was your year, because it just never went away. It seems like.
I mean, this year we had the cold, but we just didn't have that kind of snow.
Yeah, we didn't.
So that was, a bit of good news for us.
Right. Yeah. I mean, if you like snow, this year wasn't really your year, because we had all the cold weather for it for sure, but we never just really got a significant snow system. Like I said, back in November, that was our largest snowfall was the 29th and the 30th. I believe we got a little over 6 inches between the 29th and the 30th. But then after that, we had a couple weeks where we had consecutive snowfall every single day, but it would just be, a trace.
Right. And that was the thing to me that really stood out this year was we had so many days where we'd have 1 inch of snow or 2 inches of snow.
Right.
We eventually built up a snow base. We had 8, 9 inches on the ground at one point. But we never got that big snow. I think the biggest one we saw was a recent nor'easter on the East Coast that produced 3 feet of snow.
Which that destroyed the records from the blizzard of 78 that we're just referencing, because I think places in Rhode Island actually exceeded 40 inches of snow to conclude the storm. So,
and winds of 85 miles per hour.
Snow-a-cane.
Yeah. So our winter, while it was cold, it could have been a lot
could have been a lot worse. Yes.
Yeah.
Yep, for sure.
Certainly could. The interesting thing, we get this from people a lot, in the community, because you'll hear meteorologists, we oftentimes, because we like things nice and neat in the weather world.
Right.
So we refer to things like meteorological winter, meteorological spring. But that's not the same as what folks, when you look at your calendar and you see first day of spring, it's a little bit different.
It is. Yep. Yeah. So meteorological spring, it actually starts in a few days here. See, we're recording this on what, the 24th. So I think it's about 4 days away. And really the biggest difference is it's just an easier way for us meteorologists to just kind of block, the seasons together. So for example, meteorological spring is March, April, and May. And it's just kind of more aligns with the consistent warming that we have with those months. Because by the time we get to June, pretty much the entire month of June is summer heat, right? So
Right.
that's meteorological summer is the first day of June. And we've had that for every season. Whereas astronomical spring mainly depends on where the sun's laying around. So, it lines up with the equator on the 20th this year, for example. And that's the day where everyone on the planet sees exactly 12 hours of daylight and nighttime. So that goes more along with that. And then, of course, as we go later into spring, that's where we just, see the increase of daylight until the summer solstice, which is the middle of June.
Yeah, and it's not that I argue with either one. They're both fine. There's nothing wrong
Right.
with either one. But for meteorologists, it's just so much easier to associate winter with, November, December, January, and then,
Right.
you get into February and March and April. We like those 3-month blocks when we're kind
Yes.
of dividing things up.
And another thing, too, is it gets people excited, because we still have to wait another few weeks for the actual date of spring. But hey, meteorological spring is only a few days away, even though the weather, it's definitely not really showing any signs of spring anytime soon.
Well, we know springtime in Michigan can bring snowfall, it can bring severe weather, it can bring a little bit of
Absolutely.
everything. So I expect we'll see a little bit of everything as we kind of get closer and into more of a spring pattern. What are we're averaging 2 to 3 minutes of extra daylight?
Yeah,
day?
oh gosh, I don't know the exact number. I know we're approaching 3 minutes.
Yeah.
It's just under is like the max that we see for every day, and that's of course right around the spring equinox.
You
But
start to notice each evening, the sun setting a little bit later.
yes,
Since I'm more of an evening guy, and you do the weekend mornings, so you're aware of the sunrise and sunset.
yes, yep,
But for me, I notice those sunsets getting a little bit later and a little bit later,
Yeah.
and then of course, as we move into March, it won't be long. We'll be springing our clocks forward.
right, yeah, yep. That's exciting. That's going to be let's see, I think the March 8th. I think it's usually it's the second weekend in March
Yeah.
is when we spring forward, but.
Right.
Whether or not you like it or not, I think it's just like a sign that we're getting a little bit closer to spring. And of course, we spring forward. It's right in the name. But yeah, no, going back to like you were talking about with the daylight, expanding, it's always the best feeling like leaving here at like 6:30 and, just seeing the sun just a little bit longer. And then eventually it's going to be past 7 o'clock, which is pretty nice. And it just gets better and better from there.
Yeah, I mean, I enjoy. For me, summer's kind of the best as far as doing outdoor stuff because obviously it's warm, and then you have these extra long days.
Right.
In contrast that with our winters where it just gets dark
So quickly.
early.
Yeah. I mean, by the time it's 5 o'clock, it's just so depressing. So,
Yeah.
It's pretty nice having it humbles us, I would say, for sure. I think, we can appreciate that we're getting these longer days. And the same thing goes with the cold temperatures that we had, because by the time, it hit 32 degrees after we were below that for 3 weeks, it just felt that much nicer.
Yeah, I mean, when we look at the spring outlook, because it's another hot topic, what's it going to be like? I mean, we're kind of looking zoomed in here, and this is across the Great Lakes region in the eastern U.S., and you see that the above average temperatures, and we're looking for March, April, and May. So that's our spring, March, April, and May.
Yep.
And you've got some below average temperatures in the UP, and for us, it's a little bit probably closer to average. But that doesn't mean you can't have some wild temperature swings from day to day.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we kind of see that in the forecast now because, like I said, the day that we're recording this, we got 50s in the forecast. And then behind that, we have temperatures in the 20s. So, I mean, that's something I think we'll definitely see a lot more, especially if this is what the trend is as we go into the next few months.
I mean, we're going to be coming out of, for those who really get into weather, we've had a La Nina winter. And that's certainly made a big difference as far as our weather patterns, what we typically see. That's going to be waning as we get closer and more into spring and closer to summer. So we'll begin to feel the impacts of that here. So maybe we'll have a more normal spring if there's such a thing.
Right. The word normal. But yeah, and then looking at the precipitation outlook too, I think we get a little bit of a better chance to see more precipitation. I think maybe since we're kind of in between that line of the colder temperatures and the or the colder than normal temperatures and the warmer than normal temperatures off to the south, that kind of puts us maybe more of an active storm track, which is kind of what they're hinting here from the Climate Prediction Center.
Right, because I mean, you think about that, it can certainly go either way. I mean, you do have some big snows that happen in the spring,
Yes.
but you also can have big severe weather. Last year, we got off to a really early start with severe weather season. We had some big severe weather in May.
Yes. Yep. End of March, and then May too. We had
Yeah.
those two events that had several tornadoes with both
Right.
of them. So it'll be interesting to see if hopefully this year we don't have that much of an active weather pattern, but we're getting closer to March, and that's usually when weather gets really interesting around mid-Michigan.
Yeah, and then to contrast that, I mean, if you got above normal precipitation, you saw the temperature outlook. I mean, could that go back towards snow?
Right.
I
Yeah.
mean, that's certainly possible. There have been years we've got some pretty big snows in March and even April.
April,
And,
yeah.
I remember, was it probably 2004? We had a snow in May where I got up that morning and there was snow on the ground.
Yeah.
But then May snows are the kind you really like because, by the afternoon it's 50 degrees and
Right.
sunny or
Yeah. And it's all
60.
melted. Yeah. I remember a time, I believe it was 2014, I want to say something around there. I was spending the night at my grandparents' house with my cousin, and it was May 15th. I remember that. And I remember my cousin woke up. She was like, Cole, like, there's snow on the ground. I was like, whatever. And there's a blanket of snow on the ground, and it looked so weird because at that point, there was already leaves on the trees and everything. But we
Right.
just got, and that was, of course, on the west side of the state. We had a little bit of lake effect this morning, and it came down just hard enough for it to accumulate for a little bit. But it did eventually melt, like you said. It gets into the 50s, and it
And
goes
those,
away.
those snows can be really problematic because, when you get into a spring pattern and like you get the leaves on the trees and then you have a big cold snap,
Right.
because the leaves are going to add weight to the trees. And
Yep.
so if you get those wet or heavy snows that stick to everything, then power outages are more of a concern
more
when they're in the middle of
likely.
winter.
For sure, yeah. There's several stories. I mean, and that goes the same thing where we get those early snows where the leaves are still on the trees. In the fall, I've heard several stories. I had a professor that he told me about the time that there was a big lake effect snowstorm over in Buffalo, and it was like in the middle of October, so still like a bunch of leaves on the trees. And he told me that he got stuck in traffic, I believe, or something. So they like stepped out of the car, and he said that it was just constant snapping because the snow on the trees
Right.
had added so much weight plus the leaves that he said that there was just constant snapping with all the trees. And I forgot the percentage, but Buffalo, New York lost a lot of trees that day because
Yeah,
of
no
that.
doubt. I mean, and this will be one of those springs for us to keep an eye on because since we're still kind of in a La Nina and as we're
Right.
coming out of that, will we get enough cold air to interact with some of that moisture that we expect and give us an above average spring snowfall? I know that's not what we want to think about when heading into spring, but there are years where that happens. So that'll be one of the things that we have to watch out for. But going back to the severe weather side of things, this is a time of the year where you can get a lot of severe weather as well.
Yeah, and we've already had that happen last week. Like I said, once we got into that one day where we got into the 60s, it came with a little bit of severe weather. We had one severe thunderstorm warning in our office, the Grand Rapids office, which spans all the way from about US 10, almost pretty close to the Michigan-Indiana border. But the records for that go back to 1986, and we've only had 6 years where we've had severe thunderstorm warnings issued in February. So certainly some interesting stuff. So already an active start for sure to the severe weather season in
Yeah,
Michigan.
and I have no doubt this year will continue that trend. It seems like typically when you think of Michigan severe weather, it's more of like a late May into June when
Yep.
we get our severe weather, and sometimes we'll get a secondary peak, which will happen like as fall is kind of transitioning more towards winter,
Right.
the clash of air masses. But those are the two times. But the past number of years, there's been quite a few where we would jump off to an early start, and then suddenly, we hit June or July, and we're kind of ridged out, and
Yes.
it's the high pressure system overhead,
Right.
and the endless nice days of boring weather. which-
Yes. That last year was like that. Yeah, we had the, end of March, middle of May, those severe weather outbreaks. And then it seemed like by July, it was hot and sunny every single day. You couldn't really escape it. It's hard to think about now that we were complaining about it. But,
Right, right.
you know,
And we'll see this year too. I mean, because as we kind of come out of our spring pattern and maybe we go more towards an El Nino type scenario, Will that increase our risks for, drought or anything this summer?
Yeah.
Or will the wet pattern of spring continue? Because, oftentimes one of the basic things of forecasting is, if you want to get the forecast right, whatever the weather was today, forecast it tomorrow. It's called persistence. And more
Right.
often than not, you're right. It's kind of a joke in the weather world. But patterns will operate that way too. So once you get in a wet weather pattern, like we may this spring, then that once it begins to flip sometime in the summer, does that then mean that we'll end up with, some more drought conditions or
Right.
wildfire danger? Because, northern Michigan was over the past few years, we've had some issues with wildfires.
Yeah, and it seems like every year now that we've had, air quality alerts, and especially in the summertime.
Yeah.
I mean, it's been really odd with that because of the, it's not just northern Michigan, but Canada. I mean, they've had a lot of wildfires, so it's interesting to see what their weather pattern,
Right.
and how it affects us because, when the smoke is thick enough, it can affect our temperatures because, the sun's not able to heat us up as much as, if there weren't any smoke,
Right.
but things like that. So it's definitely, it's kind of like a domino effect for sure.
I don't remember as many years, in the past 20 or 25 years here in the state of Michigan. I don't remember as many consecutive years where we've had to deal with so much Canadian wildfire smoke.
Right. Yeah. No, it's definitely be interesting to look back and see at like the upper air level patterns and see if that had some type of
Right.
thing to do with it too, not just the precipitation. But yeah, certainly. I mean, the past 3 years at least, my time at Central, I just it seems like I was always like walking out of class and there was smoke.
Right.
So just definitely some interesting stuff with that.
As we head through the next several weeks, of course, in weather, we're making bets all the time when the first flakes of snow will fall, when the first freeze will happen. So what if you were to take a guess, what would you say for our first 70-degree day?
Oh man, I hope
Let's put him on the
sooner than
spot.
later. Yeah, no. I mean, if we have a pattern that we're going to see warmer than average temperatures, which I feel like I just looked at the 8 to 14 and it had like the entire lower 48
Right.
and warmer than average temperatures. But man, let's see. Today's February 24th. I want to say maybe by the middle of March.
Middle of March?
Yeah, maybe.
Right.
I'm just being a little optimistic there, but normally we see that a little bit later. I think March 29th is normally the date that we usually see our average first 70-degree day. But with these wild temperature swings that we've been having, if we keep having that, then the chances that we're going to see our first 70s looking a little bit more likely to be maybe a little bit earlier. I don't know. I hope so. I don't want to jinx it too. So.
I'm going to say March the 19th.
19th.
How about
Okay.
that?
Yeah.
Here are some interesting stats on the first 70-degree days in the last 5 years. And look at 2024.
Yes, I remember that too because I remember it was a beautiful day and me and some buddies went to one of the hiking trails around Central. And I remember there was still some snow left like in the areas that don't see as much sun. And I remember I built a little snowman and I put the little temperature symbol and it was like 74 degrees or something that day. And this is funny because there was still snow on the ground too.
Right.
Because it was the end of February, it's still wintertime. So definitely that's one of the earliest years that we've had a 70-degree day in February.
Those are obviously super memorable. And you look at some of the other dates, and it fits a little more with kind of what you'd expect. Although
Right.
that 2023, we had to wait all the way into April.
April, yeah. I hope that doesn't happen again.
Oh God, me too. But the warmer you get, when you get those early 70-degree days, of course, that's when you start thinking more about severe weather. So, I guess we'll end up, seeing like, what is the actual first 70-degree day. But I thought we were in trouble back, in January when we hit, 60 degrees on January 9th or whatever it was. I thought, boy, this is going to be not a good winter. But all the signs kept pointing towards cold. We had to wait
Right.
for it to get here, the same as we have to wait on the 70-degree highs now.
Yeah, and what's funny too is a lot of people just associate like the 60-degree temperature or more just with spring. And when I was making that graphic, I was thinking about, when do we normally see our first 60-degree day? Well, we already have, and it was the second week of the year.
Right.
So I had to bump it up 10 degrees and look for when we normally see the first 70-degree day. And I took the past 30 years of data and it combined to March 29th, which of the last 5, they've been right in the middle of March, or they've been in extreme cases like late February or early April. But yeah, just hopefully this year that we see it right in the middle of March too, maybe even a little bit earlier. Fingers crossed. But again, I
Right.
don't want to jinx it too.
And I mean, we're already getting questions, or I am at least on Facebook, people asking, is this going to be, a hot summer? That's always, every year,
Yeah.
like last year, I thought, last year was so hot. We had all these 90-degree days. And I thought, boy, and then you start looking at the records and like we're nowhere near records. And,
No.
there have
Yeah.
been some really hot years out there. So whether or not we end with a, like an early 70-degree day, even if it were to happen in the next week, that doesn't necessarily mean that the summer is going to be hot. But you go back to Climo. Climo will get you every time. I love the law of averages, and that's certainly when we were looking, kind of researching this episode, and we're looking at the spring outlook and the summer outlook and things. And I
Right.
kept thinking, we're coming out of La Nina, heading towards El Nino. We end up getting a wetter, whether it's snow or whether it's rain, spring. Then that starts to make me think about drier conditions, maybe some point in the summer when the pattern flips a little bit. And then I wonder if that'll mean more 90-degree days this year.
Yeah. Ugh. I mean, right now it sounds fantastic, but once
Yeah.
it happens and it's just sunny every single day, it gets kind of tough. But another thing too is I can't believe when I'm looking at like data for Lansing how far back our records go. I think it's like the 1860s.
Right.
So like it's really hard for us to break records because back in the if our records go back more than 150 years, it has to be some pretty extreme temperatures to break those records. I think the coldest temperature we recorded back in the end of January when we had those super cold temperatures, I think it was negative 16 degrees, and we were nowhere near our record. It was like negative 24, and it was set back all the way in probably like the 1880s or
Right.
something. So yeah, it's definitely the more years we have, the more data there is, and it's just harder and harder for us to break those records. So when we do break a record, it's kind of a
Yeah.
big deal.
Yeah, no, it's interesting to look at the almanac each day, and there's so many record lows and highs and everything else from the 1800s. This is one of the longer, in terms of amount of data you have, areas, the Lansing area that we've got those records to look back on. I did a story a year or so ago where I was looking at. So when you talk about the normal high is say 50 degrees.
Right.
Well, that's when you average out the high over the past 30 years.
Yes.
And so what I did was I went back and I started with like the 1910s or 1920s, and I was looking basically at rolling 30-year averages. So 1930, what was the average temperature?
Oh, that's
1931.
super interesting.
And so what I found was that overall there's a warming trend.
For sure.
And when you look at just the average high, or the average temperature, I should say. But when you looked at the average high versus the average low, that's where things got really interesting in the state or in the Lansing area, because our average high temperature hadn't increased as much as our overnight lows had increased.
Really?
So it's our low temperatures which had really taken a notch or two up, but our daytime highs were just slowly warming. I found that really interesting.
Yeah, for sure.
And then, and of course, we're coming out of winter, so we've been talking about snow a lot. I found that snowfall had decreased significantly in the past, 10, 15, 20 years.
Yep.
But if you went back and you kind of correlated a little bit between some of the major volcanic eruptions around the globe, and we would have a couple years of cooling. And so our
Oh.
snowfall average would creep back up a little bit.
Yeah.
The overall trend is towards lower snowfall as compared to, say, the early 1900s here. But there were some peaks in the 80s and a couple other spots where snowfall totals kind of crept back up.
Wow. And that's something I would never think of. That's super interesting to look at
Yeah.
that type of data and then kind of correlate it with, what the trends we have been seeing.
I was surprised by the overnight lows. And of course, we jokingly here call the clouds that move into November permaclouds, because it seems like when the clouds roll in November,
They don't go away.
you just don't get good sunshine until spring again.
Yeah.
And so, when you look at daytime highs, it can certainly affect those, but it really affects those overnight lows.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what I was, again, I haven't done any more significant research into that, but that was kind of the first thing I thought was, we're seeing a little more cloud cover here. Is there something holding our overnight lows up a little bit more? But that's certainly something interesting to check out,
Yeah, and that's something we've seen a lot this year. It's the process of radiational cooling when, the skies are clear because the clouds act like a insulator blanket when we do have them. So it does keep us a little bit warmer. And when the winds are calm too, it really lets our temperatures just drop significantly. So yeah, to look and back and see, the data, looking at like the clouds and maybe translating to where the overnight lows would be pretty interesting to look at.
Right. I mean, there's so much climatological stuff you can get into, and that's probably for,
It's like a rabbit hole.
there's a whole different bunch of different shows we can do about that.
Yeah.
But I think it's interesting today, for viewers to kind of, or for those on the web watching us or wherever you're watching us, that meteorologists, how we track those different seasons and the different numbers, whether it's snowfall averages, or when we say it was a colder than average winter. That as a meteorologist, your mind immediately goes, that key 3-month period in the middle of winter, and then that March, April, May, that's our spring, even though it doesn't line up with necessarily what your phone or your calendar tells you.
Yeah, no, and certainly, and as we head closer to spring, just the hope that we do see those warmer temperatures, especially with the few weeks that we've had that, we got up there, like I said last week, when we got into the 60s and we had the sunshine, especially the sunshine, like you were saying, when the permaclouds move into November, when we do have those few days in January and February where we do have the sunshine, it's like we can appreciate it that much more.
Yeah,
And that's
no doubt.
something we hopefully will see a lot more as we head into the month of March too.
Yeah, and so the key takeaways, like today, is we're coming out of La Nina. So as we move into spring, you can probably expect more storm systems. Now, those can be
Right.
cold fronts with rain, and ahead of cold fronts, that's where you watch out for your severe storms.
Yep.
But I have no doubt that we'll probably see, a little more in the way of snowfall before we get, really into spring. And then as you listen to, to your meteorologist on air, online, or wherever, that, each day we're kind of tracking those stats, and we're already thinking, like head towards summer, how many 90-degree days, how warm, how cold is it going to be? Because like you said, when you come out of winter like this, we're all kind of looking forward to some warmer weather.
Yeah, any day, even in the 40s, it's like, yes, it's just with that cold weather we had, like I said, it just really has humbled us. So definitely looking forward to the next month and seeing those warmer temperatures.
Yeah. So again, we hope you found this really informative and everything. If you have any questions or you have ideas for shows, things,
absolutely.
topics you'd like for us to cover, you can email us, dyoung@wlns.com, Engle@wlns.com, find us on Facebook. Lots of different avenues to kind of track us down. Because we have lots of ideas for shows which we think are really interesting, but we'd also love to know what you out there would like for us to talk about, questions you might have.
Yeah, because if the viewers are watching, we obviously want to know what you want to see, and we want to provide that for you. So
Certainly do. Well, listen, we appreciate everyone tuning in for this episode. We look forward to next week's and lots more fun topics coming up over the coming days, weeks, and months. So thanks again for joining us for this episode of Rain Check.